There are many ways of using the cannabinoids. They can be CB1 agonist, antagonist, CB2 agonist, etc. And there were also various other ways, CBD, and I spoke about CBD. Now let's go to actions of CB1 and CB2. The first topic I want to discuss is neuroprotection. As I again mentioned yesterday, we have the immune system. The immune system takes care of many of our needs for protection, but not all of them. And one of them is neuroprotection. And we started working with Professor Esther Shohami. She's a pharmacologist, works on brain trauma. And we tried to see whether the cannabinoids are involved in neuroprotection during brain trauma. And the first thing we looked at was what happens to one of the endocannabinoids, the 2-AG, in the brain when there is brain trauma. And we found that the levels of 2-AG went up 10 times. This is the red one over there. After 4 hours, we had a lot of 2-AG there. It went down a bit later on, but it went on and on for 24 hours and even a few hours later. Now, we wanted to see whether this is just because we have messed up the brain and the brain doesn't know what to do under the conditions of trauma. So we thought if it is a protective mechanism, then obviously if we administer exogenous 2-AG, which is relatively easy to synthesize, then let's see what happens. And indeed, we found that if we administer exogenous 2-AG, we see lowering of the edema. During head trauma, there is a lot of water in the brain, more than we need. And also there are we looked at a neurological severity score, the way the poor animal moves around, does all kinds of things. I will not go into the technical details. Believe me, the neurological severity score is very important. And if we gave 2-AG, we saw that the neurological severity score is much improved, especially at a certain dosage. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, there is a biphasic effect with some of the endocannabinoids. At 0.1 milligram, it doesn't act. Dose is too low. At 5 milligrams, it acts very well, improves the neurological severity score. But if we give 10 milligrams, the effect is lower. This is something we see, and there are many others have seen in many other situations. So one should take good care of what's happening, whether one does not, in a certain situation, give too much or too little. Now, we went to our pathologist and asked them to see whether the infarct volume, the part of the brain that is damaged, goes down when we administer 2-AG, and indeed it went down by nearly 50%, and it was very significant. So we knew that obviously under our conditions we can improve the neurological severity score, we can improve the outcome of brain damage. Now, does it act through one of the cannabinoid receptors? And the answer was yes. If we give an antagonist the relatively high doses, we can block the activity of 2-AG. The antagonist is CB1. So we were very happy with that and went ahead trying to see whether it has whether it is important without giving the drugs. What happens if an animal does not contain the CB1 receptor? Will it be more susceptible to damage? And the answer is yes again. If we take mice that genetically the CB1 receptor has been knocked out, we see that they do not respond to the 2-AG. So the CB1 receptor is a protective receptor, part of a protective mechanism. If we knock it out, then the animal is much more susceptible to damage. How does it, what about other things? During brain damage, for example, the blood-brain barrier is also damaged, and one gets a lot of things from the blood into the brain. Now, that's not something we would like to see, because there are a lot of things in the blood that we can get rid of them, but the brain is too delicate, so there is a blood-brain barrier. And it's relatively easy to see that. We can inject a dye, and if the blood-brain barrier is okay, then the dye does not go into the brain. But if the blood-brain barrier is damaged, then quite a lot of the dye goes into the brain, and we can see that. Well, if we give 2AG, as we did, then the blood-brain barrier is stabilized to a large extent, and much less dye goes into the brain. So here we have a very important central mechanism for guarding the brain. And there is no drug today that helps us, and I sincerely hope that we shall at one point be able to introduce a drug in that respect. Now, what does 2AG do in addition to that? For example, it inhibits the TNF-alpha after CHI is a closed head injury. It inhibits the tumor necrosis factor, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. It also does that with other cytokines, IL-1 beta expression. Again, it lowers the expression of this pro-inflammatory cytokine. Let's see whether, okay. Now, there are a lot of other details. I don't want to go into them. Just one point. There is, we actually went into the clinic with a derivative, and it passed stage 1 clinical trials in brain damage and stage 2, and went into stage 3. We had people coming from that had undergone traffic accidents, had brain injury, and at the last moment, and I'm not sure why this happened, we had almost finished, and the company had spent a huge amount of money, and at the last moment, the trial failed, and there are all kinds of discussions why that happened at the last moment, after we had done with hundreds and hundreds of patients, and the results were positive. I think that at some point we shall try to find out exactly what happened and go back and continue the results. Now, brain injury goes through two major mechanisms. One of them is enhancing the effects of glutamate, cytokines, reactive oxygen intermediates, ROS, and this causes neuronal and glial cell death. But there is also a second pathway, and it has to do with vasoconstriction. And 2AG, we showed that affects left-hand side, the glutamate, cytokines, reactive oxygen intermediate. What about vasoconstriction? Does it do anything in the vasoconstriction? Or thromboxane, which causes cerebral ischemia, and so on. So we went ahead trying to find out whether the endocannabinoid system is involved in vasoconstriction. It can relieve the vasoconstriction. And the answer basically is yes. Now, it does not, the brain does not do that apparently only through 2AG. It has additional compounds which do that. Apparently, things that are very important in physiology, our body tries to have several mechanisms. If one goes wrong, then another one will take over. And our body, as in principle, is stingy. We don't want to spend energy if we can possibly avoid that. For example, steroids. This is a steroid molecule. The body spends a lot of energy building a steroid molecule. And once it has a steroid molecule, by putting small elements, additional parts of the molecule on this molecule, it gets a lot of very active molecules which do not necessarily have to do anything. There is nothing except chemical relationship between them. For example, if we change over there, we get our androgen and estrogens. And if we put something at the 11th position, we get corticosteroids. And if we get something over there, we get aldosterone. And if we get on that position, we get progesterone, corticosteroids. So our body is stingy. It tries to use whatever it has for as many situations as possible. So we thought maybe this is what's going on with cannabinoids as well. For example, we knew that anandamide, the molecule on the top, is formed from a molecule which is called, which the name is there, the structure is there, and this is found in membranes, but also there is another compound which is present there, and the difference between the two is just one carboxyl group. The one on the left side is called phosphatidylethanolamine, and the one on the bottom is phosphatidylserine. They differ only one carboxyl group. So, on the principle of stinginess, is it possible that the body does exactly the same? It produces anandamide, and as everything there is the same, it will also produce the molecule down there, arachidonylserine. So we thought chances are that being stingy, our body will take the membranes and while making anandamide, it will also make the other compound, which may be useful for a variety of in a variety of physiological processes. And so here we have anandamide on the left-hand side up there, a 2-AG and arachidonylserine, which differs from anandamide just by a carboxyl group. So we looked for it, and yes, it is present in the brain, it's present in the periphery, it can be synthesized, so we took the RAS, we call it, arachidonylserine. We took the RAS and looked what this molecule does, and surprisingly, it does not bind to the receptors, neither to the CB1 nor to the CB2, but it protects the brain just as 2-AG does. So here we have another example of two different ways that our body tries to lower damage. One of them is through the cannabinoid receptors. Another way is through this particular compound. We are looking together with Heather Bradshaw. Is Heather around here? And she just told me yesterday that she knows how RAS works, at least in part, at least to another receptor, and so we are very happy, and Heather is probably going to push it further on. May I have the next slide, please? So here we have a good example how our body acts to the cannabinoid receptors, but also through molecules that are very closely related, cannabinoid-like molecules that do not bind to the receptors, but act as protective mechanisms. Now, what about actions to the CB2 receptor? I have a student, she's completing her PhD thesis, and she looked at molecules which are a little bit strange. One of them is derived from pinene, a very well-known material that's a natural product, and another one which is derived from camphor, also a very well-known product. And we synthesized derivatives which had previously been available in my lab, and we found that these two compounds act specifically on the CB2 receptor. The natural products, anandamide and 2-AG, act both on CB1 and CB2. If we want to look at CB of only one of them, we prefer to have specific compounds. And these compounds are specific for the CB2 receptor. And I will not go to the synthesis. It's a little bit complicated, and that's what a PhD thesis is for. She's been working for two years trying to find out how to do all these things, but ultimately we found ways to synthesize these compounds. And the only thing which I would like to point out is they are the same compounds here, but one is an alcohol and the other is an acid. And we looked at their activity of the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and we found that a compound called 308 and a compound called 910 are very good, they bind very well to the CB2 receptor. They do not bind to the CB1 receptor. So here we have materials that can be explored for the specific activity on CB2. Some of the other compounds, 914, which is the acid, does not bind well to either of the receptors. And yet, when we looked at what's happening, we saw that the compound that binds specifically to the CB2 receptor is an excellent protector against closed head injury, as we had seen with the natural compounds and we had seen with RS. So the natural compound 2AG acts through the CB1 receptor and protects our brain. This compound, which is a specific CB2 agonist, acts through the CB2 agonist and protects our brain. And RS, which does not bind to either of these, also does that. So our brain, our body is conditioned to protect or at least lower the damage of something so very important, brain damage. So chances are, I'm almost sure that one of these compounds or related compounds will become drugs that will protect us against neurological damage or certainly against brain damage. There is nothing today. If somebody is in a traffic accident and gets serious brain damage, there is very little we can do about it.